Welcome back to English Through Stories. I'm Eliel.
And I'm Maya.
And today, I need to say this right away. Today's story is one of those stories where you're listening and you're thinking, oh no, no. Like you can feel exactly what's coming, but you can't stop it.
Yes, it's one of those slow motion situations. You know something is going wrong, but the person in the story has no idea. None. He thinks he's doing everything right.
He is trying so hard to be respectful, to be polite, to be the perfect student, and somehow, that is exactly what causes the problem.
Which is something that I think a lot of English learners will connect with deeply today. Because this isn't a story about someone being careless with English. It's the opposite. It's about someone who tried too hard. Someone who used language that was too formal, too serious for the situation.
And that gap between the language you choose and the moment you're in, that gap is the thing that can make a small misunderstanding spiral into something so much bigger. And that's exactly what happens to our main character today.
I'm already nervous for him, and we haven't even started the story yet.
Right? Okay, let's set the scene. Before we get into the story, I want you to think about something. Have you ever tried to apologize in English, sincerely, genuinely, from the heart, and used a phrase that felt powerful, a phrase that felt grown up and formal and serious, and maybe you thought, this sounds so mature, this sounds so professional, but then the reaction you got was not what you expected?
Because sometimes in English, the more formal your apology sounds, the heavier it becomes. The weight of the language changes everything.
We're going to come back to that idea, but first, let's meet our character. His name is Junho Lee, and I want you to hold on to that feeling, that idea of trying your very best and still getting it wrong as you listen to what happens to him.
Eliel, tell us the story.
Okay, here we go. His name was Junho Lee, 23 years old, from a small city outside of Busan, South Korea. And the first thing you need to know about Junho is that he was the kind of person who prepared for everything. Not just studied, prepared. There's a difference. Studying is sitting at a desk with a textbook. Preparing is what Junho did, rehearsing conversations in the mirror, writing down phrases he might need at the grocery store, practicing his good morning and how are yous before he got out of bed each day. He had arrived in Vancouver, Canada, 3 months before this story begins. He was enrolled in a graduate program in environmental science at the University of British Columbia. He was one of 4 international students in his cohort, and from the very first week, he had one goal above all others: to not embarrass himself. Not in his research. He was confident about his research. It was the English, always the English, that kept him awake at night. He had studied English for 11 years in Korea. 11 years. He could read academic papers. He could write lab reports that his supervisor called thorough and well-organized. He scored in the 91st percentile on his English proficiency exam. But here in Vancouver, English felt different. It moved faster. It was full of jokes he didn't understand and references he had never heard. People used their hands and their eyebrows as much as their words, and there was something underneath the conversations, a current, a rhythm that Junho could feel but couldn't quite catch. So he compensated. He over-prepared. He kept a small notebook where he wrote down expressions he heard from his classmates, from the radio, from the cashier at the campus cafe. And when he didn't know what to say in a situation, he fell back on something he had always been taught. Be formal, be respectful. In doubt, use the most proper, most correct language available to you. In Korea, formality was safety. Formality was respect. He had not yet learned that in English, formality is a dial, and you have to read the room to know where to set it. It was a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of morning Vancouver does so well, gray and soft, the mountains hidden somewhere behind the clouds, the whole campus smelling faintly of rain and coffee. Junho had his laptop bag over one shoulder and a travel mug of instant coffee in his other hand. He was heading to the Environmental Sciences building for a department seminar, a weekly research talk where graduate students and faculty came together to hear about someone's work and ask questions. He didn't love the seminars, not because the research wasn't interesting. It was. He loved the research. He dreaded the part afterwards, the informal mingling, where everyone stood around with their coffee and talked about things that had nothing to do with science, the weather, weekend plans, TV shows. This was when English felt most like an ocean, and Junho felt most like he was standing on the shore, watching, not quite ready to swim. He was 5 minutes early, which was typical for Junho. He pushed open the door of the seminar room with his elbow, his hands were full, and stepped inside. And that was the moment. The door caught him slightly off balance, his elbow slipped, and his travel mug, the lid just barely not fully closed because he had been in a hurry that morning, tilted forward. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just a small, quiet tilt, and a thin stream of lukewarm coffee arced through the air and landed on the sleeve of the blazer belonging to Professor David Mercer. Professor Mercer was the head of the department. He was 61 years old, had been at UBC for over 20 years, and was widely regarded as one of the warmest, most approachable faculty members in the entire Faculty of Science. His students described him as the kind of professor who remembered everyone's name, who asked about your family, who laughed easily and genuinely. He was standing by the door talking to a postdoctoral researcher when the coffee hit his sleeve. He looked down, he looked up, and his expression was nothing. Mild surprise, maybe, the tiniest wrinkle of eyebrow, that was all. "Oh," he said, and then he laughed, a small, easy laugh. No harm done. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded handkerchief, a real one, the kind that belongs to a man who has been wearing blazers for 40 years, and dabbed at his sleeve. 3 words, no harm done, and a laugh. That was the entire incident as far as Professor Mercer was concerned. He had already turned back to his conversation. But Junho was not finished. Junho stood there, frozen, his travel mug still in his hand, his face burning. In Korean culture, in his family, in everything he had been taught, you did not simply walk away from a moment like this, not when you had done something to a person of authority, not to a professor. The guilt he felt was physical, like a hand pressing on his chest, and his mind went immediately to his notebook, to every formal phrase he had ever written down and practiced exactly for this kind of situation. He took a breath, he straightened his posture, and he said, clearly and carefully, in his best formal English, "Professor Mercer, I am deeply sorry. I have no excuses for my behavior."
Oh, yeah,
Oh, Junho.
I know.
No, but wait, keep going. I need to hear what happens. Keep going.
Professor Mercer stopped. His hand stilled on his sleeve. He turned back to Junho slowly, the way you turn when something unexpected needs your full attention. His expression had changed. The easy laugh was gone. Something careful had replaced it, something attentive. He looked at Junho the way you look at someone when you realize they might be telling you something important. "I'm sorry," he said, not as an apology, as a question. Junho felt the attention and interpreted it as the professor wanting to hear more, wanting to receive the full apology properly. So he continued. He had prepared for this. He clasped both hands in front of him, the way he had seen people do in formal situations. "I take full responsibility. It will not happen again." The postdoctoral researcher standing next to Professor Mercer, a young woman named Priya who had been in the department for 2 years and understood its social temperature very well, went very still. Professor Mercer said nothing for a moment. He folded his handkerchief slowly and placed it back in his pocket. Then he looked at Junho with what could only be described as genuine concern. "Junho," he said quietly, and he used his name, which Junho had not expected. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," Junho said, confused. Yes, I am simply very sorry." "Of course," said Professor Mercer. "Of course." He nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone has told you something you are still absorbing. "Thank you for telling me." And then the seminar began, and everyone sat down, and Junho spent the next 45 minutes staring at the back of the chair in front of him, replaying the last 5 minutes and trying to understand why he felt worse than he had before he apologized. He would find out the next day. He arrived at the department's shared graduate student office at 9 in the morning and found his office mate, a Canadian student named Ben, sitting at his desk with the particular expression of someone who has information they are not sure whether to share. Ben was the kind of person who always seemed to know everything that was happening in the department, not through gossip, but through a combination of friendliness and proximity. He knew which professors were feuding, which students were struggling, and which administrative decisions were coming before they were announced. It was a gift. "Hey," said Ben. "You okay?" "Yes." "Why?" Ben turned in his chair. "So I heard something this morning, and I want to ask you about it before it gets bigger." Junho sat down slowly. "What did you hear?" Ben exhaled. "So apparently Professor Mercer is concerned about something that happened with you." He paused. "He talked to Dr. Osei this morning." Dr. Osei was the graduate coordinator, the person responsible for the well-being of all graduate students in the department. Meeting with the graduate coordinator was not casual. He what?" Junho's voice came out smaller than he intended. "He told Dr. Osei that you came to him yesterday morning and said, and I'm telling you what I heard, okay? I don't know the full story. He said you told him you had done something, that you had no excuse for your behavior, and that you were taking full responsibility for your actions." Ben looked at him carefully. "Junho, what did you do?" Junho stared at him. "I spilled coffee on his jacket." The silence that followed was enormous. That's it?" "That is all. A small amount. It was not even hot. He said no harm done." Ben put his face in his hands. He stayed there for several seconds. Then he looked up. "Junho, when you told him you had no excuses for your behavior and that you took full responsibility, he thought you were confessing to something serious." "I was confessing? To the coffee?" "No, I mean, in English, when someone walks up to you and says, 'I have no excuses for my behavior and I take full responsibility,' that's not what you say about spilling coffee. That's what you say when you've done something really, really bad, like academic misconduct bad, or harassment bad, or, bad." Junho felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. He thought I was confessing to something. He thought something serious happened that he didn't know about. And because he's Professor Mercer, because he's a good person, he went to Dr. Osei to make sure you were supported. He wanted to support me. He thought you were in trouble, or that you'd done something that needed to be addressed properly." Ben shook his head. "He was trying to help you." Junho sat with that for a long moment. The coffee, the small stream of lukewarm coffee on a blazer's sleeve. No harm done, the professor had said, and Junho had responded as though he had done something unforgivable. He had handed a small moment a weight it was never meant to carry. "I have to go talk to Dr. Osei," he said quietly. Yeah, I think you do."
Okay, I genuinely held my breath through that whole last part.
It's painful in the best way, right? Because you understand Junho completely. Every single thing he did came from a good place.
He was being so respectful. He was being so careful. And the language he used, I mean, in another context, that language would be perfect. Like if you had actually done something serious, "I have no excuses for my behavior." That is a powerful, sincere apology.
That's exactly it. The language wasn't wrong. The language was mismatched. It was the wrong language for the moment. And in English, that mismatch, choosing the right words for the wrong situation, can completely change the meaning of what you're saying.
Can we talk about what happened with Dr. Osei? Like, how did that go?
So, okay, I want to tell you, and this is the part of the story that I think is actually really beautiful. Junho walked into Dr. Osei's office and explained everything. The door, the coffee, the phrase. Dr. Osei, who had clearly been preparing to have a difficult, serious conversation, listened, and then he laughed. Not unkindly. He laughed with relief, and he said, "Oh, Junho, you have just taught me something today."
Oh, that's so kind.
And then Dr. Osei did something really wonderful. He walked with Junho to Professor Mercer's office, and the three of them sat together, and Junho explained, in simpler, plainer English this time, that he had only meant to apologize for the coffee, that he felt terrible about it, that in his culture and in the English he had studied, those phrases felt like the right level of seriousness.
And how did Professor Mercer react?
He laughed too, a big, genuine laugh, and then he looked at Junho and said, and I love this, he said, Junho, next time, just say, I'm so sorry about that. That's all I need. And then Junho said in the flattest, most earnest voice, that is only 6 words. And Professor Mercer said, yes, 6 is plenty.
6 is plenty. I love that.
And from that day on, Professor Mercer had a kind of soft spot for Junho. He remembered that interaction for years. He actually told it at a department meeting once as an example of cultural miscommunication, with Junho's permission, and the whole room laughed, and then got into this long, rich conversation about register and formality, and how English doesn't always reward effort with the way you might expect.
And it became this moment that Junho carried forward. Like instead of being something that embarrassed him, it became a lesson he owned.
Exactly. That's the thing about these mistakes. The ones that feel the most enormous in the moment, they are also often the ones that teach you the most and the ones you remember most clearly, most specifically years and years later.
Okay, we have to talk about the mistake itself, because I think this is something so many English learners do, and I understand why they do it, but let's really open it up. What exactly went wrong with Junho's English?
All right, so let's name it clearly. The phrase Junho used was, I have no excuses for my behavior. And then he followed that with, I take full responsibility. Now, are those phrases grammatically correct?
Completely correct. Perfect grammar.
Perfectly correct grammar, sophisticated vocabulary, clear meaning. So the mistake was not in the words themselves. The mistake was in the register.
Register. Let's explain that, because it's one of those words that sounds technical, but it's actually a concept that changes everything about how English works.
Register in language is the level of formality you use and how well that level matches the situation you're in. Every language has register. In Korean, register is very codified. It's built into the grammar itself, into verb endings, into the way you address someone. You literally use different verb forms depending on whether you're talking to a friend or a professor. The language tells you the register.
Right, and in English, the register system is less visible. It's less built into the grammar. It's more in the vocabulary you choose, the phrases you use, the length of your sentences. And so English learners, especially those who've studied formal, written English, sometimes learn formal register very well without realizing everyday spoken English almost always lives at a much lower level of formality.
And the lower level of formality is not less respectful. That's the crucial thing. That's the thing Junho didn't know yet. Informal English is not disrespectful English. In English culture, particularly in Canada, in the UK, in Australia, in the United States, using very formal, heavy language in a casual moment can actually feel more alarming than the thing you're apologizing for.
Because heavy language carries weight. When you say, I have no excuses for my behavior, the listener's brain immediately asks, what behavior? What happened that requires this kind of language? Because this is the language of courtrooms, of formal letters, of serious professional consequences.
It's the language of someone who has done something they know is genuinely wrong and is bracing for serious consequences.
Exactly. And so when Junho used it for a coffee spill, a moment that Professor Mercer had already dismissed with 3 words and a laugh, the professor heard the weight of the language and assumed the situation must match the language.
Not the actual event, the language. The language told a different story than the event, and the language won.
That is such an important insight. The language told a different story than the event. I want people to really sit with that.
So let's talk about what Junho could have said instead, because that's the practical piece. That's what we want you to take away from this. What does a natural, appropriate English apology sound like for a small accident, for a moment like this?
So there's a spectrum here, and where you land on that spectrum depends on how serious the thing is. For a very small accident, bumping someone, spilling a tiny bit of something, accidentally interrupting someone, the most natural English response is something incredibly simple.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that, with feeling in your voice. That's the one. That's the full apology. For most small accidents, that is genuinely everything you need.
Or even simpler, oh gosh, I'm sorry. Just that, 3 or 4 words.
My fault, I'm so sorry. Oh no, I'm so sorry. I'm so clumsy, I'm sorry about that. These all carry warmth and sincerity, and they match the size of the moment.
The key is that they're warm but light. They carry emotion, you sound genuinely sorry, but they don't carry weight. They don't make the other person feel like something serious has just happened.
Now, let's go up the scale just a little. Let's say it wasn't just a tiny bit of coffee. Let's say you actually ruined the jacket. You knocked over an entire cup and it went everywhere. Now the stakes are a bit higher. What do you say then?
Then you'd go a little bigger. I am so sorry. Let me help with that. Oh no, I'm really sorry. Please let me pay for the cleaning. I feel terrible about this. Can I do anything? These phrases carry more weight, but they still sound natural. They still sound like a real person apologizing, not a formal statement.
Notice that in those phrases, we're adding an offer to help. That's how you show sincerity in English without escalating the formality, not by using heavier formal language, but by offering something, an action, help. That combination of I'm sorry plus let me help reads as deeply sincere without sounding alarming.
And now, what if it actually was serious? What if you had genuinely done something wrong in a professional context, at work, in an academic setting, and you needed to apologize in a formal way?
Then the language changes. Then you might say something like, I owe you an apology. I made an error in judgment and I understand the impact that had. Or, I want to apologize formally for what happened. It was wrong and I should have known better. You see how those phrases carry real weight but still sound human?
The difference between those and Junho's phrase is subtle but important. I have no excuses for my behavior. That phrase in particular has a very specific tone. It sounds like you're preempting someone else's anger, like you expect them to be furious with you and you're standing there with your hands up saying, I know, please don't punish me.
It's a phrase of submission, of bracing for consequences. And that's why it alarmed Professor Mercer, not because it was rude, but because it implied something serious enough to warrant that kind of submission.
Which brings us to something deeper about English apologies that I think is really worth talking about. In many cultures, including Korean culture, Japanese culture, many East Asian and Southeast Asian cultures, the size of your apology is a signal of respect. The bigger and more formal the apology, the more respect you're showing the person.
The apology is honoring them.
And that logic makes complete sense within those cultural systems. It is a form of deep sincerity.
But in many English-speaking cultures, particularly in North America, the size of your apology is expected to match the size of the incident. If your apology is much bigger than the incident, it creates discomfort because the listener thinks either this person is incredibly anxious and stressed, or they know something I don't know about how bad this is.
Or, in some contexts, and this is also interesting, an over-apology can actually make the other person feel responsible for your distress. Professor Mercer had already said no harm done. When Junho kept going, kept escalating, the professor might also have felt, on some level, did I make him feel this way? Is he this distressed because of something I did?
Which is so uncomfortable because now the person you bumped into is apologizing to themselves on your behalf.
English has a kind of social agreement around small accidents. You apologize briefly, I accept it warmly, we both move on, and no one carries the moment forward. That's the deal. And Junho, with the best possible intentions, broke that social agreement by carrying the moment much, much further than it was designed to go.
And this is something I find genuinely fascinating about English and about language learning in general. You can have perfect grammar, you can have a huge vocabulary, you can score 91st percentile on a language exam, and still find yourself in a situation like Junho's, because the thing that's missing isn't knowledge of the language, it's knowledge of the culture that lives inside the language.
Register is cultural knowledge. It's not just linguistic knowledge. It's knowing that Tuesday morning coffee spill language and formal professional misconduct language are completely different registers, and that one of them will terrify a professor who was already having a perfectly good morning.
Poor Junho, but also amazing Junho, right? Because of what he did after.
Yes, let's talk about that. Because the thing about Junho that I find so admirable is what he did with this experience. He didn't shrink from it. He didn't avoid Professor Mercer for the rest of the year. He had that conversation with Dr. Osei, he went to the professor's office, he explained, and then, this is the part I love, he started a new section in his notebook.
He didn't retire the notebook.
He did not retire the notebook. He added a new section. He labeled it, and he told this story at a conference years later, he labeled it Apologies by Size, like a menu. Small accident, these phrases. Medium mistake, these phrases. Serious situation, these phrases.
He reverse engineered the whole register system into a chart that made sense to him.
That's brilliant. That's genuinely brilliant.
It is, because he took the logic that already existed in his Korean language knowledge. Different situations require different levels of formality, and he rebuilt it for English. He just needed the key. The incident with the coffee was the key.
And that's the thing about language mistakes that I really believe. The ones that hurt the most in the moment are almost always the ones that teach you the fastest, because you feel them. You feel the gap between what you meant and what happened. And that feeling is uncomfortable, but it's also a very, very effective teacher.
You don't forget a lesson when you've lived it. You remember it in your body. Junho will never ever again say, "I have no excuses for my behavior" to a professor over a coffee spill. That lesson is permanent.
Let's give a few more examples of natural apology phrases, because I think it's useful to just hear them again and again until they feel normal. Iliel, you be the person who made the mistake. I'll be the person you're apologizing to.
Okay, so, I'm so sorry. I just bumped into your chair.
Oh, no worries at all. Don't worry about it.
See how quick that was? That whole exchange took about 2 seconds. Now, medium, let me borrow something and forget to return it.
Hey, I've been looking for that book.
Oh gosh, I completely forgot I had it. Here, I'll bring it tomorrow first thing.
Oh, it's fine. I was just looking for it today. No big deal.
There, I showed regret, I explained briefly, I offered a specific action. That whole exchange probably took 8 seconds, and now we're moving on.
Now, a genuinely serious one.
Okay, this one's harder. Let's say I missed an important deadline that affected your project.
I want to be honest with you. I'm frustrated. I needed that report yesterday, and now we're behind.
I know, and I owe you a real apology for that. I made an error, and I should have come to you sooner when I realized I was running behind. I'm sorry. What do you need from me right now to help fix this?
Okay, thank you. I need the report by end of day, and I need to know this won't happen again.
You have my word. I'll prioritize it right now.
Notice what Iliel did there. I owe you a real apology. I made an error. I should have come to you sooner. Those are honest, weighted phrases, but they're still human. They're still personal. You can feel the regret without feeling like someone is reading from a legal document.
And the key piece at the end, what do you need from me right now? That's the move that takes an apology from words to action. That's where sincerity really lands, not in the formality of the phrase, but in your willingness to do something to fix it.
In English, the most powerful apology is usually a short one followed by an action. The length of the words is not what makes it sincere.
Short words, real action. That's the formula.
Let's also quickly name the phrases that can sound too heavy for everyday mistakes, not because they're wrong, but so you know to save them for the right moment.
Right. I have no excuses for my behavior. Save that. Save it for something serious. I take full responsibility for my actions. Again, this sounds like you're addressing a committee. Fine for a formal, professional context, unusual for a Tuesday morning.
Is sincerely and unreservedly apologize. Very, very formal. This is letter writing language. If you say this to a professor over coffee, they will think you have a lawyer.
I deeply regret any inconvenience caused. This is corporate English. You'll see this in company emails after something goes wrong. It's fine there. In conversation, it sounds like you're reading from a script.
These aren't bad phrases. They're just very calibrated to very specific contexts. And the skill, the real English skill, is knowing which context you're in.
which is actually one of the hardest things to learn about any language, because it's not in a textbook, it's not in a grammar rule. It lives in the space between people, in tone, in body language, in whether someone laughed and said no harm done before you even opened your mouth.
If someone tells you no harm done, match that energy. Let it be done.
Let it be done. 6 words is plenty.
6 words is plenty. I love that so much.
Okay, so let's recap the lesson quickly, cleanly, before we get to our community question, because this is genuinely important and I want it to stick.
Please.
Number 1, register mismatch happens when you use language that is much more formal or much more casual than the situation requires. In English, this can completely change how your words are interpreted, even if the words themselves are correct.
Number 2, the weight of your apology should match the size of the situation. Small accident, light, warm language. Medium mistake, a little more weight, plus an offer to help. Serious situation, honest and direct, plus a commitment to action.
Number 3, in North American English culture especially, over-apologizing, using very heavy, formal language for a minor incident, doesn't read as extra polite. It reads as alarming. It makes the other person wonder what they missed.
Number 4, the most effective everyday apology is short, warm, and followed by action. I'm so sorry, let me help with that. Will almost always do more work than any formal phrase.
And number 5, and this one is Junho's lesson, which he would probably tell you himself. Your formal English is not wrong. Your vocabulary is not the problem. The skill you're building is knowing when to use it. That takes time. It takes experience. Sometimes it takes spilling coffee on a professor.
Preferably lukewarm coffee.
Ideally lukewarm. Room temperature is even better.
Okay, Eliel, I want to do something before we close out today's episode. Because this story, I feel like this is a story that is going to live in a lot of people's memories. And I think there are a lot of people listening right now who have their own version of this, their own Junho moment.
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone who has learned a language as an adult has one of these.
So we want to hear from you. And I mean this genuinely, not as a formality, not as a checkbox. We actually want to know your story.
Have you ever made a mistake in English or in any language you were learning that came from trying too hard? From using language that was too formal, too serious, too much? Maybe you were trying to be respectful and it came out strange. Maybe you used a phrase from a textbook that made someone look at you a little funny. Maybe you apologized for something small and it turned into a whole conversation you didn't expect.
What happened? What was the situation? And how did you handle it afterward?
We want to hear your Junho moment. The moment where you realized that knowing the words is only part of the story.
And don't be embarrassed. These are the moments that shape you as a language learner. These are the moments that actually teach you something no classroom can. So share them in the comments. Share them proudly. Because if Junho can walk into a professor's office and explain his coffee catastrophe and come out of it with a story that he tells at conferences, you can share yours with us.
We read every single comment. Every one. And sometimes your stories become future episodes. So drop your Junho moment in the comments below. We want to be part of your story.
And if this episode helped you, if it made you think about English differently, or if it made you feel just a little less alone in your language learning journey, please share it with someone you know. A friend who's learning English, a colleague who's living abroad, a student who's struggling with exactly this kind of thing.
Stories are how we learn. They always have been. And every time you share this channel, you're helping someone else find their way into English through the most human thing we have. A story worth telling.
Thank you so much for being here today, for listening all the way through, and for being part of this community. It genuinely means everything to us.
It really does. Until next time, keep listening, keep noticing, and remember, 6 words is plenty.
6 words is plenty.
See you in the next story.